All right, y'all. Happy Wednesday. Right now it's a little before 7 in the morning, and most of you are probably still asleep. So here's the thing. What I want to do with you guys today is talk a little bit about how musical instruments make different sounds. We're going to look at what the physics is behind how a guitar and a flute and a trumpet and a trombone work to tickle those little hairs on the inner part of your ear. So to remind you, that's not what I wanted. To remind you, sound is a longitudinal or a compressional pressure wave. And so here's like normal still air. The molecules aren't moving in any sort of coordinated or coherent fashion. But when I start shaking the speaker right here, right? Oh, good, it's not playing the sound. I'm supposed to play a sound note as we did that. Let's try this again. Sound. Come on, you got this. All right, I'm going to show both these things. We're going to play a tone. When I start, there we go, shaking the speaker, the wiggling back and forth of the speaker cone right there causes these pressure waves to move through the air. And you can see that the things are emanating outwards in a spherical pattern. And you can see that, some of these air molecules are labeled red. They're not really moving. They don't have a net movement. They wiggle back and forth, but they're kind of staying in their same spot at the end of the wave. The actual pressure wave itself, the effect, of course, travels through space from left to right like that. And so I've represented that, our way here with these dashes. The sound itself is actually moving from the instrument over to your ear. That's an ear right there. But the air molecules themselves are just wiggling back and forth and back and forth and back and forth and back and forth like that. So regardless of what type of musical instrument it is, the big idea is that something on the instrument is vibrating, and that vibrating part of the instrument shakes the air back and forth. So the questions that we want to answer today is, how do these musical instruments make different pitches? How do they make a low-pitch sound or a high-pitch sound? And how do they make different volumes? How do they make a quiet sound or a really loud sound? And it all has to do with how you get this instrument to actually vibrate. So I'm going to go back to my little sim right here and remind you, seriously? The sound didn't work again? Oh, that's frustrating. This is LaSalle. Technology sometimes doesn't work, y'all. Bear with me here. Okay, so we're going to play this again. When the sound wave wiggles at a medium speed like this, you hear kind of a medium pitch. And so watch the yellow part of the speaker right here on the left-hand side that's wiggling back and forth. When I make that frequency go higher, when I wiggle it back and forth more often, like this, right, your brain hears that as a higher pitch sound. When I make it wiggle less often, like this, back, forth, you hear that as a low pitch sound. So back, forth, forth, like that. Amplitude, or the strength of the wave, is just how powerfully this thing is shaking. And when it's very, very weak, not much energy is being put out. You don't see huge ripples right now because you can see that little speaker cone is not really pushing that hard. It's just shaking a little bit of air. A bigger amplitude is going to sound louder because boom, 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 there's these big, powerful waves that are being generated. All right, so when we go back to this, if I want to make this thing have a higher pitch, what I need to do is simply increase the frequency. I need to somehow get this air right here to wiggle back and forth more often. So instead of these sound waves going wiggle, 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 to get a higher pitch, I want it to go wiggle, 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 like that. To increase the volume, to make this thing louder, what I need to do is increase the amplitude. So instead of little baby wiggles like this, I want it to go wiggle, 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 wiggle like that. I want it to have a really strong vibration back and forth. All right. The way we accomplish this depends on what type of musical instrument there are. Now, some of you guys might have learned this in music class in junior high or middle or elementary school or whatever. Western music has 4 major families of instruments: brass, woodwind, string, and percussion. Brass and woodwind are 2 different types of just tubes of air. So a tuba, a bugle, a clarinet, a bassoon, all of these are instruments that you are using your lungs to blow air through a tube. There's a subtle difference between whether you're pursing your lips and kind of making like a buzzing sound, or whether you're blowing over a reed or an opening on a flute like this for a woodwind. But the important thing is that you're making air inside of a tube, and it can be a curvy or curled tube, vibrate. Those are a little bit hard to draw, and so I'm not gonna teach. I'm not going to show you guys the physics behind it because it's really hard to draw air vibrating back and forth inside of a tube. Percussion instruments, you have a membrane stretched over an opening, and you hit it with a stick or with your hands, right? A bongo drum you play with your hands, drums and cymbals you can smack with a drumstick. You're shaking a 2-dimensional or a surface and that's vibrating some air. Also really hard to draw, so I'm not going to worry about these. What's going to be easiest for me to draw and demonstrate for you guys are the string family of instruments, and this is any instrument that has a long string that you pluck, either with your fingers, like a bass guitar or a banjo, or you could use a pick, like on a regular guitar, or you could use a bow, like a violin or a cello, but somehow you're making a string wiggle back and forth. The physics is the same between all of these, right? The physics is that something on the instrument vibrates and that shakes air. But I'm going to draw this one for the examples today because it's easiest to draw, right? So here's the idea. When you pluck a guitar string or a violin you draw the bow across a violin string, or you pluck a bass or whatever, what you're really doing is sending a wave pulse down the string like that. Right, so you pluck it and it's doing this. No, it's going a whole lot faster than that. Y'all remember that day that we watched the videos? The guy had to use like super slow-mo on his iPhone from the inside of the guitar to be able to see this. And it's not really just one wave. It's actually some really kind of complicated shape that looks like this that's going back and forth. There's multiple waves in what's known as kind of a standing wave pattern that's traveling back and forth down the string. All right, so it looks something like that. What I want you all to think about, though, is this air molecule right here. Right? I want you to think about that air molecule right there, because normally we have all these molecules all the place over here. When I pluck that guitar string and that pulse comes going by, when that pulse goes by, it bumps that little air molecule, right? Which then makes this sound wave propagate out in that direction. Actually, it goes in all the directions, but it's just easiest to think that as this pulse right here travels down the string, it's going to hit that air molecule, which hits that one, which hits that one, which hits that one, and we generate a sound wave traveling out in a direction that looks like this. So this setup right here, I can't draw on my string, but just imagine that air molecule, and it gets bumped, and we wait a little bit, bumped, and we wait a little bit, bumped, and we wait a little bit, and it gets bumped again. So every time that pulse goes by, this air molecule gets wiggled, and those would be our compressions, so those would be each individual sound wave, right? So you're vibrating the string, you're sending a pulse to the string, which wiggles the air. And it also wiggles that air and that air and that air. But this is the sound wave that we care about, is from that generated spot right there. And so the vibrating string causes the air to wiggle. Well, if I want this to wiggle more often, if I want this air molecule right here, instead of going bump, 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 if I want it to be a higher pitch, I want this thing to get wiggled more often then. I want it to go bump, 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 bump. And really there's only two ways of doing that. We could shorten the string. Right? Now, I can't actually do this on the simulation, but imagine if I were to take this wrench or this clamp right here and move it up to right here. Now, this pulse that I've made in the wave, it doesn't have to go all the way down and back like that. It just has to go to here and back. And if you're running a shorter distance, you can do it faster. Y'all, that's the whole point of having all these frets on a guitar. This is a bass guitar, by the way. You can tell because there's only 4 strings. Normally, when I pluck this string right there, that pulse would have to go all the way down to the bottom. What is that called? The bridge or something like that. And then come all the way back up. It's got to travel its whole distance. Well, when people hold a string down on a guitar, what they're really doing is shortening the length that it has to travel. So now, if I hold my finger down on this fret, the string is only this long. And so that pulse can get down and back a whole lot quicker. Right? That's the point of all the frets on a guitar. That's the point of having a whole long neck on a violin or a string instrument. When you pinch your finger down, you're changing the length of the string, which means the pulses can get down and back quicker. The other way of doing this, the other way that you can get that molecule to wiggle more often, would be to make the pulse go a faster speed. So this isn't changing the amount of time it takes to get down and back because the distance is shorter. This isn't pinching this isn't going to be pinching the string shorter like this. We can keep the string the same length. What we're going to do is simply make that pulse get down there quicker. And as you guys remember, the only way that we can make a wave travel faster through a medium is to change the medium. And so the way we do this on a string instrument is to change the tension of the thing. So here's my normal wave pulse, bump, and we wait a little bit, and bump, and we wait a little bit, and bump. If I tighten that string up, look how much faster. Bump, and it comes back, and it goes bump. And so because the wave, the transverse wave in the string travels faster, it's able to wiggle that air molecule more often. If I loosen that string, oh man, we're going to be here a while. You guys don't want to have to wait and listen to me say bump like 3 times on this. So you can either change the distance that this wave travels by pinching the string down, or you can tighten or loosen the string to make the wave travel through it faster. Either way, what you are controlling is how often, what is this doing down here? You are controlling how often the air molecules surrounding that string get wiggled. Okay, if you wanted to make a lower pitch, well, then you just do the opposite. You make a longer string, or you loosen the string up. Big deal. By the way, that's what the tuning pegs are for in a guitar. These right here. Here's my guitars. Those little pegs up there on the top, when you turn those, what you are doing is tightening or loosening the strings that the guitars that you play on the guitar. So we go back to the second part of this. The first goal today was to say, how do we control the pitch or the frequency of sound? Check, we got that one done. So check, we understand that one now. Second question, how do you make it louder or quieter? Well, remember, loudness and quietness of a sound is based on the amplitude. It's based on how strong or how powerful each of the sound waves are. And there's a couple of ways to do this. One way you could do this would be to wiggle that molecule with more force. So if I go back to my simulation right here, restart this thing. That's not what I meant to hit. Come on, restart this thing. Instead of having just a, oops, that's not what I meant to do. What is going on here? Restart. Instead of just having like a medium height wave like that, right? If I wanted to make this air molecule right there get wiggled a whole lot harder, if I pluck that string a lot harder, if I made that pulse a lot taller, right? Then when it comes by, it would absolutely rock that air molecule with more force. More force, more energy means a stronger amplitude, which means a louder sound. And this makes sense on a piano too, right? Let me come over here to my piano, see if this will work. All right, so if I just pluck this like here's C below middle C, if I hit it gently, quiet sound. If I hit it harder, it makes a much louder sound because I'm causing the strings inside that piano to vibrate a lot harder. Okay, the second way that we can do this, oops, that's not what I meant to do. The second way we can do this is not just wiggling that molecule harder, but you could also increase the amplitude by shaking more molecules. If you could somehow get the vibrating part of your instrument to be touching more air, so instead of just worrying about this molecule and that one, if you could make this string somehow bigger, if you can make the instrument touch more space, then you can get it to shake more air, which is a bigger, more powerful wave. So I'm going to go back to my camera right now. I'm going to take a look at these two guitars right there. Now, the one on the left obviously is an acoustic guitar. The one on the right is obviously an electric guitar. And the electric guitar, when you plug it into an amp, is really, really, really loud. But when it's not plugged into an amp, when I just have it connected like this and I strum it, it's not very loud. And the reason it's not very loud is that those strings are only connected to, well, a very small amount of air. Think about how much air is actually touching those strings. Think about how much paint it would take to cover each of these strings up, and the answer is not much. My acoustic guitar has the same size strings, but it's also connected to this giant hollow wooden frame right here. And so when I shake these strings, it's not just the strings that are vibrating. I'm also getting these giant hollow wooden thing to vibrate. And because that hollow wooden thing is touching a lot more air, it causes a lot more air to shake. And so my electric is quiet, my acoustic is a lot louder. I haven't taken that thing out of this case in a couple of weeks. It's a little out of tune, isn't it? We're going to see something really similar with this little hand crank music box. This is one of my favorite little demos right there. So this is the guts outside of a music box right there. And when you turn the little handle, these teeth go over these little bumps right there and it makes a noise. The thing of it is, this doesn't touch much air. If you think about how much air is actually touching these little parts of this metal comb right there, it's not much. And so that's pretty quiet. But if I hook it up to something that touches a lot more air, if I hook it up to like a giant soundboard or something that actually can shake a lot of air, like say my desk right here, now it's not just these teeth that are shaking the air, it's going to be this entire tabletop as well. So quiet. That's pretty cool, I think. Okay, so this is what's going on inside of like a megaphone. The old school thing, you know, looks like the giant cylinder or cone that you can hold up to your mouth to speak through. Not the electric ones with the amp inside of it, but this like the old school ones you'd see like cheerleaders use or whatnot. Your mouth doesn't touch much air. When you hold that big cone up to your mouth, right, then it's shaking more air and so it's louder. Same idea with the soundboard. If you think about like a giant grand piano, right? So I can draw a top view of a grand piano, can I? And look something like this. That inside of these guts, here's all the strings inside of there, they're shaking this entire wooden and metal frame. And so this whole thing is now vibrating and shaking more air. Okay, So, you all are going to learn a little bit more tomorrow about why I'm teaching you about musical instruments. What I wanted you to see out of this video today is that you make an instrument vibrate, it shakes air. If you can somehow get that instrument to vibrate more often, it makes a higher pitch sound. And if you can get it to vibrate harder, it makes a louder sound. Hopefully that was an interesting enough video for y'all, and I'll see you tomorrow.